Abram had a lot of journeying to do. He went a lot of places to get where he was going. According to the ancient stories in Genesis, I believe God was up to something surprising and amazing in this world. While there are humans who are often plotting evil, God was plotting goodness. Seeing this, recognizing God's goodness is so much, in so much of the Hebrew Scriptures, depends on one's mindset, on one's awareness of words and language. How do I look at life? I read an article recently about the words we use literally changing our brains. As we use words like peace and love, good and kindness, our ability to reason is strengthened. Positive hormones are released in the body. When negative words are used, activity in our brain's fear center is engaged and causes stress hormones to flood our system. We end up in the fight or flight, freeze or fawn mode. I believe the Apostle Paul, though not knowing this brain research, did have an understanding of the importance of thinking about what is true, what is honorable, just, and pure. He included whatever is pleasing, commendable, excellent, and worthy of praise in his letter to the Philippians, chapter 4, verse 8. These are the things that he calls us to think on. We can look to the Hebrew Scriptures and see the goodness of God if we do so intentionally. I love the idea of God plotting goodness. That phrase comes from Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking. I guess I didn't make note of it here. I'm working with an Enneagram coach. I don't know if you know what the Enneagram is. My coach is in California, and he is Israeli. He says he is Jewish, but he's not a religious Jew. And he was raised seeing God in the Hebrew Scriptures as this mean, judging, horrible God. As many people in the Christian faith learn about God from the Old Testament. And I was surprised to hear that because, of course, I wasn't raised in the church, but when I started studying the Bible academically at Kansas Wesleyan, one of the first things the professor taught us was that the Genesis, the stories in the Old Testament in Genesis, especially in the beginning, are stories that explain how things got to be, rather than necessarily how they actually happened. That they're not historical, that they're they're an explanation of how things got to be. And I just guess I figured from a Jewish perspective that would be taught. So I was really surprised to hear this man. He writes a blog on a almost daily basis, and that was one of his blogs last week. I learned the Old Testament at Kansas Wesleyan more than any place else, and I saw it very much as a good God. That was my perspective. There are times in the Hebrew Scriptures, and today, when humans try to rope God into their dark plots in hopes of scrambling to the top, to be on top, to dominate others, to get their way, to use God as the reason for unhealthy thoughts and ideas. I listened to a Dateline podcast this week about a youth pastor in an apostolic evangelical church in the Northwest. I think it was Oregon, and this was like in the very late 90s. He used God as an excuse to hurt many people in the church where he was serving. He told people, specifically women, that what he was saying was what God wanted. And it was such a sad, sad story, which included the death of his wife, which he ended up going to jail for. He was using God. He was telling people, God is telling me this is what we need to do. Sometimes people try to enlist God's help to condemn those we want condemned, to ostracize those we want out of our lives, out of our presence, out of our tribes, so to speak. We want to use God to get blessings for ourselves, while God stays focused on the bigger picture of blessing the world, which includes blessing us in the process. This pattern of God plotting goodness began when God chose a man named Abram and his wife named Sarah. These folks were from a prominent family in a great ancient city known as Ur, one of the first Middle Eastern civilizations. Like all civilizations, Ur had dirty little secrets. Its affluence was built on violence, oppression, and exploitation. And behind that beautiful facade, its upper classes lived each day in luxury while the masses slaved away in squalor. God tells this couple to leave their life of privilege in this great civilization. They are sent out into the unknown as wanderers and adventurers. No longer do Abram and Sarah have the armies and the wealth and the comforts of Ur at their disposal. All they have is a promise that God will be with them and show them a better way. From now on, they will make a new road by walking. God's promise comes in two parts. In the first part, Abram and Sarah will be blessed. They will become a great nation, and God will bless those who bless them and curse those who curse them. Perhaps that's the kind of promise we might expect. It's the second part that's surprising, though. Not only will they be blessed, but they will be a blessing. Not only will their family become a great nation, but all families on earth will be blessed through them. This means that the children of Abram and Sarah will be a unique us in relation to all the other thems of the world. Their identity will not be as us at the top and them at the bottom, or vice versa. It will not be us against them, or us apart from them, or us in spite of them. No, Abram and Sarah's unique identity will be us for them, us with them, us for the benefit and the blessing of all. Now, y'all know from Sunday school that not everybody that came after Abram was necessarily a good guy, a good person. But God was in the mix of it. That's the important thing. God was in the mix of it. That otherly identity, us for the common good, wasn't intended only for Abram and Sarah's clan. It's the kind of identity that it's best for every individual, every culture, every nation, every religion. It says we're special, and it says they are special too. It says God has a place for us and a plan for us, and God has a place and a plan for others as well. When we lose the focus that God is plotting goodness for all of creation and start thinking of me, or of our clan, or our nation, or our religion, or our sense of identity, it begins to shrink. It can go sour and even toxic. And I think we're seeing some of that right now in our nation today. This is a small thing, but it reminded me of a prayer that I gave at a Kansas Wesleyan University, Bethany University, football game years ago, probably 25, 30 years ago. First of all, I was surprised to be asked. These were big rivals, Kansas Wesleyan and Bethany. And, I was just a religion major, but they asked me to do the prayer before the game. And then I sweated over how to formulate a prayer that would be meaningful for an afternoon game. I myself was already in a place of understanding that there's no us and them, and that although this was a sporting event, the end result was not my business, not my concern. And I think whoever won wasn't really God's concern either. And yet I was to pray for this game. I kept that prayer for a long time, and I came across it about a month ago. I must have deleted it because I couldn't find it for today. But I remember praying for both teams, for safety, for a good time for all, for an awareness of the beauty of the day, and for the folks sitting next to one another. In my mind, it was a very positive prayer. There were several folks that commented on it later to me. They somehow heard it as different than what they usually heard at football games. So I felt really good about that, because I didn't want to focus on one team winning over another. This also reminds me of there being so much us and them in this country, as I said a little bit ago. The dissension and the division runs deep in the United States. And it makes me very, very sad, because I believe in a God who is plotting goodness for all of us. And human beings, it's human beings that are blocking it. The story of Abram and Sarah's unique identity tells us something powerful about God's identity too. God is not a tribal deity of one group of chosen people. God is not for us and against all others. God is for us and God is for them as well. Actually, there's no them. I'm sorry, I'm even using that word still. God loves everyone, everywhere, without exception. And that is so hard for some folks to believe, to even grasp hold of. You know, the Hebrews understood themselves as the chosen people. And I believe that many have misunderstood that idea of their chosenness. I believe that the Hebrews knew, at least in the very beginning, that they were chosen, they were set aside, not to be the special people of God, the ones that God loves only. No, they knew they were being chosen to bring all of the world to God, to help others know God's love. Things went awry somewhere along the way, though. This story of Abram and Sarah also tells us something about faith. Faith is stepping off the map of what's known and making a new road by walking into the unknown. It's responding to God's call to adventure, to stepping out on a quest for goodness, trusting that the status quo isn't as good as it gets, believing a promise that a better life is possible. And that's scary for some people, to step out into the unknown. I remember when I was offered the opportunity to start the retreat center out in the Flint Hills, I quit my job. I was a pastor at a local church, and I gave up my salary and my benefits, my health insurance, everything. And it was an adventure. It was scary as well. Those 12 years out there are some of the best years of my life, even though there were hardships in the midst of it. To actually step into the unknown, to step into an adventure, to believe that God was involved in it all, was just I want to say a miracle in my own life. I think that this is something for us to seriously consider, to pray about, to be aware of, the stepping off the map of what's known, this responding to God's call to adventure, this trusting that the status quo is not as good as it gets. As we look around the sanctuary on Sunday mornings, as we look outside the church building and see those folks who aren't with us in here, perhaps it's time to start thinking about how we can be more deeply blessed and be a blessing to those around us. When I say things in this particular sanctuary, I always feel like I'm preaching to the choir, because I see goodness coming out of this church. I see outreach in this church. It's a small church, but you're giving to the hurricane. You're looking at giving to the food bank. At Christmas time, there's always a family that's being engaged, and people that have had fires in their homes. I believe this church has been and will continue to be a blessing in many, many, many ways. In his book, America at the Crossroads, by George Barna, he offers a disturbing survey of the trends impacting American culture and the challenges that they pose to the church. In one chapter, he offers insights about the unchurched. I don't like that term at all, unchurched. I didn't go to church, but I didn't think of myself as in church. And there's just something, there's a negative connotation for that for me. Anyway, he offers insights about those who don't attend church, including these points. This information is from around 2014 when his book came out. He wrote that 46% of adults are now unchurched. That was an increase from 35% in 2005, from 35 to 46 in almost 10 years. 62% of the unchurched considered themselves to be Christian. 59% of Americans disconnect from church life either permanently or for a prolonged period of time between the ages of 15 and 29. 48% of the unchurched, of the people who don't go to church, indicate they are not connected to a church because it provides no value to their lives. 14% of people who don't go to church say they are open to trying a new church, but that's only 14%. Barna adds these observations. Attracting churchless people into a corporate faith experience requires more than an outreach strategy and tactics. This is about more than improved marketing or having greeters at the church's front door in a larger church. Churches are facing a radically different outreach environment than existed a decade ago, including an antagonistic media that continually portrays churches in a negative light. As I read that, as I thought about that, I thought, what negative hormones are they putting out into the world with that negative light on churches? The churchless population is substantially larger and has a different demographic profile than in the past. To penetrate that population, churches must raise their game to meet more demanding and sophisticated expectations than ever. And in most cases, the church community will have one shot at persuading the churchless to return for another experience. And in another article that I read by Kara Powell in the Washington Post, I learned that teens and young adults, 15 to 29, the same age range mentioned in the Barna book, do not want to attend a church that's cool. They want a church that's warm, meaning welcoming, accepting, hospitable, and caring. Warmth is more than being nice. It's about authenticity and connection and warmth, and it takes time. It's a process with people. How are churches going to be that blessing to others? What needs to change? How will church be done in the future? It's something to think about. Forgive my tangent here, but it seemed important to share this in the context of God's plotting goodness and in our being blessed to be a blessing and about true faith. Just what is true faith? True faith isn't where we get the inside track or special advantages or a secret magical formula. Faith isn't a mark of superiority or exclusion. True faith is about joining God in God's love for everyone. I think I've shared before that I've struggled with this word love. What exactly does love mean? I grew up with the understanding of love like Cinderella and the Prince, a knight in shining armor, and that it had to be a romantic love. I have learned over time that love is much, much bigger than that. It's caring, it's gratitude, it's kindness, it's being there for other people, it's not judging. God is so much bigger. True faith is about seeking goodness with others, not at the expense of others. True faith is seeing a bigger circle in which we're all connected, all included, all loved, all blessed. True faith reverses the choice pictured in the story of Adam and Eve. In that story, Adam and Eve chose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil to be like God. True faith keeps us down on the ground in solidarity with others and all of creation. Sadly, for many people, faith has been reduced to a list. For some, it's a list of beliefs, ideas, or statements that we have to memorize or agree with if we want to be blessed. For others, it's a list of do's and don'ts, rituals or rules that we have to perform to earn the status of being blessed. Abram didn't have much in the way of beliefs, rules, or rituals. He had no Bible. He had no doctrine, no temple, no commandments, no ceremonies. For him, true faith was simply trusting a promise of being blessed and to be a blessing. It wasn't a way of being religious, it was a way of being alive. And so this story not only tells us something about God's true identity, this God is always plotting goodness with love, it not only tells us about the nature of true faith, to simply trust a promise, it also tells us about true aliveness. If we scramble over others to achieve a goal, that's not true aliveness. If we harm others to acquire a desire, that's not true aliveness. If we hoard our blessings while others suffer in need, that's not true aliveness. True aliveness comes when we receive blessings and become a blessing to others. Like all of us, Abram and Sarah will lose sight of this version of aliveness sometimes in their story. Even when they lose faith, God remains faithful. Through their mistakes and failures, I think this goes for Jacob as well. Was it Jacob? Yeah, Jacob as well. Through mistakes and failures, they keep learning and growing, discovering more and more of God's desire to overflow with abundant blessing to everyone. Blessings for all. Are we ready to step out on that same journey of faith with Sarah and Abram? Will we join them in the adventure of being blessed to be a blessing? Are we ready to make the road by walking? How can we do this as a church, as a faith community, as individuals? Is there something more to do? I so appreciated reading the emails about this church making plans to do something for the hurricane survivors. What happened down south was not us and them. It was us. It was us. May we all open our awareness to God's call on the life of each of us as individuals, as a congregation, as a house of faith, and in this community. And there's an insert that has some questions for you to ponder. This comes from Brian McLaren's book, We Make the Road by Walking. These are some questions just to take home and think about over the next week. Is there a particular thought or idea that caught your attention, that provoked you or disturbed you or challenged, encouraged, warned, helped, or surprised you? Think of a time when you were aware of obeying or participating in a group that saw itself as blessed to the exclusion of others rather than for the blessing of others. Again, I think I told you about the group. I started out at the retreat center. It was a group of women. There were 10 of us that met. And my intent, I started it because I was out there by myself. I needed some community. So there were women from Salina and Emporia and Cottonwood Falls, Mattville Green, that came together. And immediately, the first meeting, they wanted to be exclusive. They wanted to shut the door on opening to other women because some of them didn't trust. They'd been in groups of women before and didn't trust. So they were going to just shut the door right off the bat. I couldn't do that. I wasn't able to continue as a part of that group. Where in the world do you see people practicing the kind of otherly identity to which God called Abram, us, for the sake of others? Are you seeing that in the community, on Facebook, in your family? Are you seeing where people are being inclusive? There was a question for children there, I'll skip that. An activity this week, you might look for opportunities to be a blessing to others this week. And then share your experience with somebody. Let somebody know that there's goodness happening in the world. And you might meditate in silence. Hold this truth in God's presence. I am blessed to be a blessing. So those are things that I encourage you to consider over the next week. Don't just sit here this morning and hear the words out of my mouth, but take them out the door with you and live them in some way. We're about ready to receive communion this morning. And last week, or 2 weeks ago, when I came, the sermon was on lift, hold, and drink from the cup. And if you remember, the idea was to lift the communion cup, intentionally be involved, be aware of what we're doing when we take the communion cup and what all that means, and then to hold it and reflect for just a moment on what our own lives are like right now and how we might be different or better or some changes we need in our life. And then drink the cup, remembering Jesus in the drinking of it as we're called to do. So I just put that out there for you now. I really like it when we gather around the table. I have a chair up here for Linda if she would like to sit, but I think there's something about coming together. Communion used to be a potluck. People would gather around the table. So if y'all are comfortable, I'd like to invite you to come forward and be around the table. We can move the table a little bit so y'all can be down on the floor. But then we're going to serve one another as well. And I'll give instructions as we get closer to that. So because we're a small congregation, can you do this? Can you do this? We have a where did I put the hymn, Debbie?